The highest education is that which doesn't merely impart information to us, but that which makes our life harmonious with all its existence. A very good evening to all of you, and namaskar to each and everyone present over here. I, Priyanka Sarkar, am privileged to be the host of this online platform of 2 days international conference on the topic entitled Perspectives on Inclusive Education, Practices, Issues, and Challenges in the context of COVID-19, organized by our very own institute, Rajendra Academy for Teachers Education, Gopalpur, West Bengal, India. Our institute is NAC accredited with the purpose of advancement of knowledge, attitude, and skill for developing prospective teachers through teacher education programs. The college runs teacher training courses on MEd, BEd, and DLEd for catering to the expanding needs of qualified and competent teachers in India right from its inception from 2009. The institute is duly recognized by NCTE and is affiliated to West Bengal University of Teachers Training, Education, Planning and Administration, the University of Bardhaman, and West Bengal Board of Primary Education. Before we start with our program today, I would like to take you through the theme behind this conference. As we all know, the aspiration of inclusive education is to bring about a new approach towards the educating of children with difficulties and learning disabilities with that of the normal ones under one single roof. It brings all the students together in one classroom and community, regardless of their strengths and weaknesses in any area whatsoever. This eventually seeks to maximize the potential of all the students. Education is the only panacea to respond to and cure the challenges by taking into account multiple worldviews with alternative and indigenous knowledge systems in the new frontiers of science and technology. And this introduction of inclusive education shall try to address the needs of all the children in every community, both at the center and at the state levels. This 2 days international conference today intends to discuss the various issues related to the role of inclusive education in schools, the challenges that one might face to implement and adopt it, and the practices that one would engage the teachers in negotiating this inclusive education and acting on them. And now, I would like to begin with today's session by inviting our honorable dignitaries on this online platform. But before that, our chief patron, our very own honorable chairman, sir, Shri Jayant Kumar Chakrabarti, have not been able to make up today at this point of time, but has sent his blessings for the sojourn of this journey. Thank you, sir, for gracing us and your enlightening words, and we hope that your blessings stay with us for an eternity. Now, may I request the convener, our very own respected principal, sir, Professor Dr. Vaishnav Charan Swine, sir, to please come up on the stage and welcome our honorable dignitaries and eminent speakers with the welcome speech and commemorate the program. Welcome, sir. Please.
Good evening, everyone, and our esteemed chairman, sir, Mr. Jayant Kumar Chakrabarti, Chairman, Rajendra Academy for Teacher Education. I cordially welcome to honorable speakers, professor, teachers, research scholars, my respected colleagues, and my beloved students. Today we gathered in one platform for today's international conference on perspectives of inclusive education, practice, issue, and challenges in the context of COVID-19. I am conveying my heartfelt congratulations to all the participants and organizers of this conference, especially thankful to our esteemed chairman, Sir, Mr. Jayant Kumar Chakravarti, for the encouragement of this international conference. It is my proud privilege to introduce honorable speaker across the globe from different walk of life for sharing the knowledge and experiences with us. I also take immense pleasure in welcome our honorable keynote speaker, Professor Ramakant Mohalik, Professor Regional Institute of Education, NCRT, Bhubaneswar. He has experience of teaching to prospective and in-service teachers to all school levels, consultation to different state government on school education, and research in field of school and teacher education. The area of specialization and interest are ICT in education, data analysis and management, assessment and evaluation. He has been published more than 60 research papers in national and international levels. I heartily thanks to Professor Mahalik for giving his valuable time. I take immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Jeanette Lord, Reader in Education, Manchester Metropolitan University, Head of Education for Health and Education. She has worked as a social science teacher and a lecturer in higher education for many years, specializing in teacher education, education studies, and social science, and doctorate in Manchester University. University of Manchester. Dr. Lord has experience in school governance and educational consultancy, research and writing concern pedagogy, student experience, assessment, the nature of critical space in higher education, in inclusion, particularly issue relating to social justice in education technology. I express my gratitude towards her presence. I would like to welcome to Honorable Professor Mamtaz Begum, Dean and Head School of Education, Pondicherry University, recipient of the most coveted Commonwealth Academic Fellowship 2013 from the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission of the United Kingdom, awarded associateship from the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, jointly initiative of University Grant Commission, IUC, and IIAS. Professor Mamtaz Begum is a multilingual specialist, is an eminent educationist, ordering the high-end committee of several academic, professional and research institution. I pay my gratitude for her presence. I take immense pleasure to welcome Honorable Dr. Emmanuel Jeans Francosis and Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education, Ohio University, United States of America. He is the coordinator of the Educational Leadership Program at Ohio University, USA, as well as the doctoral specialization in comparative and international educational leadership. He published many books on teacher education and published in several peer-reviewed journals. He is the editor in chief of peer-reviewed journal, the African Symposium, the Journal of Comparative Studies and International Education. I would like thanks Dr. Emmanuel for giving affordable time in this conference. I welcome Honorable Speaker Dr. Amulya Kumar Acharya, currently working as an associate professor and head PG Department of Education, Fakirmon University, Baleswar, Odisha. He has completed his master degree in education from Sambalpur University, Odisha, PhD in education from Utkal University, Odisha. He has 18-year experiences teaching in higher education. He worked as assistant professor in education in Panihati Mahavidyalaya, Shodhpur, Kolkata for 10 years under higher education department of higher education department government of West Bengal. I express my gratitude to Dr. Amulya for his presence in this conference. This international conference focuses on inclusive education system which provide a better quality education for all children and are instrumental in changing discriminatory attitude as school provide the context for a child's first relationship with the world outside their families, enabling the development of social relationship and interaction. Respect and understanding grow when students of diverse abilities and background play, socialize, and learn together. I am glad and pay my heartfelt thanks to the organizing committee who came up together and prepared this platform, even in the midst of a pandemic shows that our college, Rajendra Academy, is embarking on another new milestone. This international conference shall create a manifesto to share and acquire valuable idea on the related sub-themes with the galaxy of people participating. The theme of the conference bear great relevance to meet the new challenge arising out of inclusive education in the present context. I hope this conference turn out to be a great success in a new horizons. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, there's no point in denying that it is the sheer hard work and dedication of our respected principal that we are gathered here today on this online platform to carry on with our international conference. We are really thankful to you, sir. And now I would like to proceed and request Mr. Ramakanta Mohalik, our honorable keynote speaker, who is the professor of Regional Institute of Education, NCRT, Bhubaneswar, India, to kindly take over from here and enlighten us. Sir, over to you.
Good morning to all. Namaste. I feel extremely happy and delighted to be part of this international conference. Respected Sri J.K. Chakravarti, the chairman of Rajendra Academy for Teachers Education, esteemed principal Dr. B.C. Swai, and the organizing committee members, most respected co-speaker today, Professor Janet Lott, Department of Education, Manchester Metropolitan University, UK, colleagues from Rajendra Academy of Teachers Education, scholars, media person, dear students, As a keynote speaker, I have to begin the discussion. I have to open the discussion. So my point of presentation will be on three important aspects of the topic: inclusive education, and especially inclusive education during the COVID time. And we all know that COVID pandemic has affected all aspects of human life across the globe. We are from India. We suffered. Even the people of England, they have also suffered. The people from other countries, they also suffered it. One of the great effect of COVID is on education. Of course, health is there, but education is seriously affected by the impact of COVID. Even when you talk about education, we say education for all. Education is something, it is not limited to one section of the people. It is not limited to one gender. It is not limited to one state. It is not limited to one language group. So that is education for all. In fact, education for all has been a slogan of the world bodies like UNESCO, UNICEF, even almost all the governments of the globe or different parts of the globe. They have been trying to provide education for all. So when we are talking about education for all, so automatically the things are coming: inclusive education. Things are coming, nobody should be excluded from the gamut of education. So therefore, inclusive education, or the concept of inclusive education, is very, very significant. And it is more significant during the time of COVID. As I just said, COVID has impacted education. I think it has impacted education very seriously to the children who are marginalized. Sorry, there was an interruption. I was talking about the impact of COVID on education for all and how it is impacted the marginalized section of the students, the the tribal groups, the physically challenged students. The COVID pandemic has seriously impacted on this. So hence, deliberation on inclusive education, education for all, education without exclusion is very, very significant. So therefore, I really express my congratulations to the Rajendra Academy for teacher education to think or to discuss on a topic which has international relevance, because inclusive education or the concept of inclusive education or the practice of inclusive education is not only useful to India, it is useful to the globe. Almost all the countries of the world, they are trying to succeed in implementing the inclusive education. So therefore, in my presentation, I'll be focusing on a very fundamental concept, what is this inclusive education. Education emerged internationally, and finally, since we are discussing basically, or the host is from India, I will be throwing light on the National Education Policy 2020 that brought by the government of India in the last year, and its significant recommendations relating to inclusive education. So if I start with my presentation, uh, just a minute. Yes. So let me go through my presentation on inclusive education. So inclusive education is a child's right, not privilege. So whenever we are discussing about inclusive education, nobody, educator or administrator will say it is a privilege for the child. It is a privilege for individual. Inclusive education is a right of the child. Every individual, child in school and adult in the university and colleges, because inclusion promotes quality and equitable education for all without exclusion, including those who may be potentially marginalized by learning need for or social position. So inclusion, when you bring everybody to the school, when you provide education for all, it will promote the quality and equity in education, which is very one of the very important social issues, not in education, in almost all the fields in the society. It promotes quality and equitable in education. And increasing awareness about rights of children with disability to have access to same educational service as children without disability has led to the idea of inclusive education. You know, if I want to say how the concept of inclusive education or the concept of inclusive educational practice is emerged. So it emerged from providing equal educational facilities or opportunities like disabled children. Another very important point I want to mention here when we are talking about inclusive education, the UNESCO's Sustainable Development Goal 4. I think you may be aware about that. Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is related to education. It talk about to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. This is also one of the background. This is one of the, I think, behind force for which all the states of the world they are trying to implement the inclusive education in the school and college. So how the concept of inclusive education emerged, or what is the historical background, what is the historical development, and this is at the global level, at the international level, because inclusive education in the last maybe 15 to 20 years, I think 15 to 20 years, we are talking about, we are discussing, we are implementing the idea of inclusive education in India. There is a time was there when in India we have special schools, that is special education, then integrated education, and now we have inclusive education. If you just just imagine, just try to visualize, the starting point was special education. The special education was meant for children with disability. We have so many special schools in India, and these students are excluded, they are separated, they are put in a different kinds of school with a different kind of teacher. This was a special education. Even after independence in our country, there are so many special schools are there for disabled children. But after some years, due to impact of human rights, due to pedagogical innovation, then we started implementing the integrated education. So in integrated education, the the students will be studying with studying in a regular school. But here, the difficulty that the school will not change. The school will not modify its structure, its teaching learning style. No. But the students have to respond. Student has to, adjust whatever available in the regular school. That was a limitation which was not useful. That is something I'm talking in India context. But finally, after 2007, then due to impact of the global rules and regulation policies or human right activists, we started implementing or talking in the field of education is inclusive education. So in case of inclusive education, the school will change, the school will modify, the school will adjust, school will bring changes, reform, so that a, a special child can learn to their potential. This is something happened in inclusive education, I think most part of the world. But let us see, so have a glance. So what are the different policy, what are the different you know documents at the global level which force the global community or different, I think, administrator of the state to implement inclusive education policy. Now almost all countries of the world we are talking about inclusive education. The first one, if you remember, that was Universal Declaration of Human Rights by United Nations. Universal Declaration of Human Rights by United Nations in 1948. And this document, there is a Article 26 which talk about, I'm quoting, everyone has the right to education. If you analyze the term everyone, everyone includes a normal child, a physically challenged child, a children from AC/ST community, a children from transgender community, a children from slum area, a children from tribal area, a remote area. So therefore, when this document declared or agreed by the leaders of the different nation, it has given an indication, it has given a direction. We should we should provide education to each and everybody. We should make education at the right of everybody. This is the first document which talk about or which talk in favor of education for all, or finally the inclusive education. And the second document that came in 1989, Convention on the Rights of Child. Convention on the Rights of the Child. There is one Article 28. I'm quoting. Every child has a right to education without discrimination. You underline the word without discrimination. Here again, when I talk about every child, it includes the special child, the child from socially disadvantaged sections, marginalized group. Here the word is added without discrimination. No child can be treated differently. Every child in the school or for the education should be treated equal. I think it has given a push to education for all, or making education as a fundamental rights in Indian context. And the third document, that is by the UNESCO in 1994, Salmanka Statement and Framework for Action, that is a recommendation. Schools should accommodate all children regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic, and other conditions. I think gradually, the concept of inclusive education is coming up. If you analyze this short paragraph, so you can find out. Now it is responsibility of the school managers to accommodate all children. If you underline the all children, you cannot discriminate your children on basis of anything physical, intellectual, social, emotional, everything is included. And in the fourth document in 1900, like 79, there is another document we talk about. This is not in 79, this is 1997, the document. International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And this document specially talk about the women and girl child. Even in the globe, I think mostly in the underdeveloped countries and developing countries, there were a lot of discrimination against girl child or women. Time was there. The girls were not provided education, not provided proper education, proper healthcare facility. But this particular convention categorically recommended to the globe, to the different countries, to the leaders, Parties shall take all appropriate measures to eliminate discrimination against women in order to make sure them equal rights with men in the field of education. Now you see, when you talk nowadays, we are talking about girls' education. We are talking about both boys and girls are equal. Here I want to bring like the transgender also. The transgender community or transgender, section of the people, they should also, you know, come to the school. They should be brought to the school. They should be educated. They should be respected. They should be provided equal educational opportunity like others. And in the 2006 Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, the Article 24, recommended parties shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels and lifelong learning. 2006, 2006, the word inclusive education has directly coming from a document. Like, inclusive education must be given at all schools and college universities. And finally, in the 2007, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It is specially talk about, even you see in Indian contexts, we have a tribes, we have very marginal tribe groups are there. We have 1,000 tribal groups are there. They are excluded. They are, they are not, integrated in the mainstream. They are not getting proper education. I think they don't want to continue get education. So for them, this rights of indigenous people or declaration is very, very important. So what I want to say, this is at the international level, these are the different, some of the important documents, important recommendations given by international organization, UN, UNESCO, in favor of education for all and inclusive education at the end, or to make education as a fundamental right. And when I talk about, I have given some idea like, emergence of inclusive education. I have given an idea like from Indian context. I think it is also equally, I think, applicable to the different parts of the globe. So inclusive education started with a, special education for, specially for the disabled children. So there are two kinds of normal and they are disabled, they are abnormal. Abnormal, I don't want to use the term abnormal, they are disabled, they are different level. So those who are different level or disabled, they must be given a different kinds of education in a different setup. This is the initial stage. Then gradually the concept of special needs is introduced. Initially, the special needs means only disabled or different level. We're going to impact all this, the global document or national convention. The concept of special needs also changed. Now, when you say special needs, we also include its genders. The girls have a special need also. When we say talk about special needs, language related special needs are there. Even in India, we say some section of the people, they have a very different language, very typical language. They also need a different kinds of education. Geographic location like a remote area, travel area, inaccessible area, the people having a different culture, different economic status. I say, like, the economically poor people, socially disadvantaged people. Nowadays, they are also part of the, special group. So what I want to try to say, education which started for different disabled children, later it was, expanded. Later it was redefined because of impact of all these conventions, because of human rights movements. as a point of the different leaders of the different different states and countries. Now the special education is expanded. It is not limited to the disabled different. Now the focus is on to provide education to all. They may be disabled, they may be gender related girl, they may be a very having a different language, having a different location, but education for all was the focus. And gradually, side by side, due to impact of all the things, the scope of inclusion or the scope of I think the string, the breadth of inclusion has, has covered all such things. Nowadays, when you talk about inclusive education, it is something like this is something like education without exclusion. Very simple. Education without exclusion. That means everybody, all children, whatever they may be dark, they may be white, they may be tribal, they may be non-tribal, they may be differently able, they may be transgender, must be included in the education at the school, university, even in the community education and the lifelong education. So you see, the concept of inclusive education has drastically changed. Now the scope is more. Now even the providing education to the people in India is a part of inclusive education. Providing education to the transgender community is a part of inclusive education. So the concept of inclusive education has emerged, and it has a very broad connotation nowadays. Nowadays, inclusive education, something like I say, education for all. It's something equal to education for all. Let us see the UNESCO in 2005 has given a definition. Inclusive education is an approach that expresses how to change educational structures and other learning atmospheres to meet the needs of the variety of learners. Now if you can analyze the definition, what is inclusive education? Inclusive education is an approach now. It is approach. You see, this is an approach. This is a kind of, I can say, this is a kind of strategy. This is a kind of way of thinking that express how to change educational structure and other learning atmospheres. Like if you want to bring or implement inclusive education in your school and college, you need to bring a structural change in your building. Nowadays, all the schools and colleges will find the ramps. Why these ramps? Because to accommodate or because to assist or to help the disabled children, those who are physically disabled, they can smoothly enter to the school. They can enter the school on their own with their will. So inclusive education requires change in the educational structure. Not only the educational structure, very more important is the learning atmosphere. The learning atmosphere, what happens in the classroom, that also need to be changed. Like earlier only the normal children are there in the class. Now a special child is there. A children from low economic background is also there. Children from transgender is also there. Therefore, we have to create a healthy classroom atmosphere, climate in the school, where everybody, all children will be respected. All children can take participation. Not only that, this learning atmosphere also includes making modification or adjustments or adoption in the learning resources like textbook. Our textbook need to be changed. Suppose for physically disabled children, we need a braille textbook. We need a different kinds of mobile that these physically disabled children can access or can use it. So the inclusive education, when I say now, it is an approach to bring changes, modifications in education structure, educational atmosphere, so that the needs of variety of learners can be met. So the main intention is through inclusive education, we can satisfy to the maximum the needs of each and every child. No child should be left behind. Every child should come to the school, should learn it, learn equally, and should participate in the class discussion, and should leave the school with a degree or with some kind of skills or learning outcomes. So inclusion highlights opportunities for an equal involvement of individuals with a disability. Here disability again they have expanded the term disability, physical, social, emotional. So they may be. So further, if you I think analyze the inclusion, the concept of inclusion, you can say inclusion is a process of addressing and responding to the diversity in the needs of children, youth, and adults through increasing participation in the learning, cultures, and communities, and reducing and eliminating exclusion within and from the education. Now, inclusive education, it becomes a process. Now, very often you might have heard the inclusive pedagogy. So, inclusive pedagogy, it's very simple. So, it is something, bringing changes, modifications in the content, in the textbook, in the methods, in the structure, in the strategy, so that each and every child can learn, can get education, I think can get a quality education. That is something inclusive pedagogy. If you as a teacher, if you can satisfy or if you can make all children understand, all means everybody, then you are following a inclusive pedagogy. So of course we need to get training orientation in the inclusive pedagogy to handle the inclusive classes. So inclusive education must include getting all children and youth into regular schools and mainstream systems, and all illiterate adult into literacy programs. It here actually, when I talk about inclusive education in a broad way, it includes the children those who are attending school and the adults those are out of school. So many are there out of school in developing countries like India, even many of the underdeveloped countries. So when we talk about inclusive education and education for all, so we have to include both those who are coming to the school or those who are in the age of school going or school coming, or those who are adult, those who never attended school, or those who attended and left the school. So inclusive education, if you want to implement inclusive education policy in the country, then we have to bring all the school students, also the adults, illiterate adults. Then only we can say, like, inclusive education is implemented successfully and it can give a dividends. So inclusive education must include concern with not only initial enrollment, regular participation, and grade promotion, but also long-term achievement. When you're talking about inclusive education, it is not limited to only bring all child to the school. You put them in school. This is not inclusive education. Inclusive education means you bring all children, let them sit at one place. But at the same time, we should see that all the students are regularly coming to the school, attending regularly. They are also participating actively in the class discussion. They are participating in the class discussion also. They are learning, they are acquiring skills, they are getting promotion, they are getting certificate, they are getting a quality education. So what I want to say, when you talk about inclusive education, like, a disabled children, simply bringing a disabled children to the school and making him to sit in the school is not inclusive education. It is only one part of inclusive enrollment. but we should help the child to participate in the class discussion. We should learn something, pass out the school education, or in the future can go for higher education, get a job. I think then only you can say the inclusive education is successful. Inclusive education requires both an analysis of the cause and drivers of exclusion. Even I think many of the organization institutions, those who are working for social issue and social cause and education, they are doing research. The government is spending a lot of money nowadays to analyze what are the causes and factor that is leading to exclusion. Because a lot of research is required. Even in India, the research is being done by the NCRT, National Council of Education Research and Training, and there is a ministry of HID also, Minister of Education now is also funding research on inclusive education, only to find out what are the causes that is leading to exclusion, so that this barrier can be removed and we can go ahead with the inclusive education. So inclusive education requires a restructuring of the school culture, policy, practices, meet the diversity of the students. I just talked about in my previous slides. The school structure need to be changed. Not only the school structure, the school building to be changed, but also the practice. I think one of the very, very important points sometimes when you discuss in our staff meeting, we discuss the attitude of the teachers, attitude of the teacher to the special children, like the children with special needs. Nowadays in India, we say children with special needs. The favorable, we should develop a favorable attitude towards these children, towards the children from ACST community. So then only the inclusive education can possible, can effectively, I think, implement in any country. And finally, if you say above all, inclusive education is not an outcome, it is not a product. Inclusive education is not an outcome of any country. It is not an outcome, it is not a result. Rather, inclusive education is a process, it will continue. Inclusive education is a process which will continue. I think, which can bring those children from different community, from different section to the school and to the college, to the adult education program, and infuse them with certain skills, including the life skills and 21st century skills, so that each and every child, those who are attending school, they can become I think, a global citizen. Nowadays, we are talking about the global citizen. They can contribute not for the country, but for the education of the entire globe. And finally, another 5 minutes, let me highlight on something like, in India, that almost all Indian, they are familiar with the national education policy that brought by government of India in 2020. I think just maybe some of the important points I want to share here. When we're talking about inclusive education, and India is one of the developing country, we have a lot of issues and challenges in implementing inclusive education. Of course, we have been trying maybe since I think 15 to 20 years to implement inclusive education in every school, every college and universities. Even we have inclusive economic policy nowadays. So some of the very, very, very important recommendation of national education policy, because this policy recommendation will be implemented in each and every school of the country. So there are fundamental principles of inclusive education as recommended by the National Education Policy 2020. The number one, recognizing, identifying, and fostering the unique capability of each child by sensitizing teachers and parents. The first step in the inclusive education is we have to recognize, we have to identify who are the children with the specific difficulties, maybe physical difficulties, emotional difficulties, mental difficulties, or intellectual difficulties, or socio-economic difficulties. We have to recognize them early. We have to identify them early. Then only we can implement the education. I think inclusive education in the country. If you don't recognize or identify these special or children with special needs, so it is very difficult to implement to succeed in the implementation of the inclusive education. And the second one is respect for diversity and local context in all curriculum, pedagogy, policy, talking education as a concurrent subject. I was talking about when I say inclusive education, it requires a structural change. It also requires change in the curriculum, the textbook, the syllabus, the learning resources. I want now we need to develop a. We are developing in India the book in the braille. Now the e-content, I think video content are we are developing in the Indian sign languages. So this is something the government need to do it. Yeah, we have to create a learning resources keeping in mind a different section of the child. So braille books can be done. Assistive device, like when there is impact of technology on every field, I think these children with special needs they can get assistance from the assistive technology. So pedagogy policy that must be changed, need to be modified. That recommendation. Full equality and inclusion in all educational decisions to ensure that all students thrive in the education system. This point is very, very important. The main essence of education is, or the main essence or main goal of education is to bring equality and inclusion. So this equality and inclusion will not come until unless all our decisions at the administrative level, at the teachers level, or at the government level is based on equality and inclusion. Education for all children of minority and underrepresented community. There is a very, I'm talking about the inclusive education is expanded. It is not only disabled children, it also includes other section of the children. So this national education policy that formulated in India also suggested. So if you want to implement an inclusive education, we have to bridge the gap in the access, participation, and learning among the children within middle class and scheduled or other outside. So for inclusive education to be implemented fully, we need to bridge the gap in terms of access. There are some tribal belt where schools are not there, where teachers are not there. So this kind of accessibility to education to ensure in all such area, then only we can inclusive education. Especially to ensure children belonging to tribal community. And India, we have a very marginalized section of the people are also there. Those who can those who are very very few are there. Even some tribe they are having 100 plus population. So for them you need to we need to work on them. We need to bring all these people to the school, to the education, to the mainstream. Then only we can talk about effective implementation of inclusive education. And finally, let me conclude with another 1 minute. Like inclusive education, as I said now, the concept of inclusive education has been evolving. So the concept itself is changing. Initially, there I say started with a special education, then integrated education, now inclusive education. I think inclusive education is most beautiful and most I think comprehensive term that is being implemented in the school and colleges in the education. I think both the governments, the non-government organizations, all the stakeholders, the parents, the teachers, even the educators like us, we should also uh, uh, use use the platform of inclusive education or the approach of inclusive education so that we can help each and every child to to get the education, to help them to become a effective citizen, not for the country but for the globe. the global citizenship we can acquire. And finally, like they can, if you can implement inclusive education in a effectively, then all citizen has a chance to contribute for the national development. Even all can contribute for national development, towards education, towards research, towards human resources. So they can do it. So therefore, the government of India, and I think many of the governments of the world, they have taken as a goal of inclusive education, to implement the inclusive policy at different levels, including education. And finally, I should say thank to the organizing team and Dr. BC Swai for giving me such an opportunity to deliberate on inclusive education as a keynote speaker. Uh, Finally, I say namaste to all my audience and the listeners. Thank you very much. Now it is over to the organizer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your amplifying words. Indeed, inclusive education is an approach, a strategy, a way of thinking how to change the educational structure. Truly, it is the need of the hour that we must come together and work on to implement this inclusive education within a healthier classroom and maximize the potential of all our students. And now, before we move on to our next honorable eminent speaker, I would like to announce the participants who would be presenting their papers today. And the list is Garema Agrawal from Regional Institute of Education, Aribam Pratima Devi, the Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar, Ms. Shairi Chatterjee, Assistant Professor of HIMT Law College, Greater Noida, Shobhik Raj, Assistant Professor of J.C. Bose Institute of Education and Research. And now, I would like to request our Honorable Eminent Speaker, Professor Janet Lord, Head of the institution, Manchester University, United Kingdom, to please take over from here and enlighten us with your knowledge and wisdom. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Yeah?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
You can hear me, okay. I'm going to share my screen. So fingers crossed that this works. So we shall see. So you should be able to see that now. Can you see my PowerPoint?
No, ma'am, right now we are not being able to see you.
Okay, hang on.
We can see you, but not the PowerPoint
Not the
presentation.
PowerPoint. Hang on a second
No,
then. Let me see if it will let me do it.
yes.
You can see me. It says it won't let me do it. Oh no. Now you can see me double. I don't know how to do it. It doesn't seem to want to do it. Okay, it's not going to let me show you the PowerPoint. So what I'll do is I will send you PowerPoint afterwards so that you can have a look at it yourselves, if that's okay. I'm really sorry that the technology is not working the way that I wanted it to, but don't worry about that. So everybody, what I wanted to, good evening, first of all, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you all the way from Manchester in the UK. And one of the nice things that's happened over the last year or so is that we're able to talk much more freely internationally now, aren't we, as a result of the technology that we've got. So perhaps one of the good things that's come out of the pandemic. And thank you for all the comments saying good evening. It's absolutely lovely to meet you all, and I'm really, really delighted to be here. I will send to your principal later on. Well, you've got, he's got my PowerPoint slides, so I'm sure that he will be able to send them around to everybody. I'm sure somebody will do that for me. So thank you very much for that. No idea why it won't work. So I wanted to explain to you, first of all, who I am and what I do. So as you said earlier on, my name is Janet Lord, and I work at Manchester Metropolitan University. And at Manchester Metropolitan University, we have 37,000 students. So it's a really, really big university. And I'm the head of education for health and education. That means that I look after all the teaching and all the learning for about 12,000 students. And a lot of them are teachers and are learning to be teachers. So we've got a wonderful building in the pretty close to the city centre of Manchester, which is absolutely lovely to work in, and I'm very happy to be working in Manchester, which is one of the loveliest cities in the UK. So that's who I am. What do I do? Well, at Manchester Metropolitan University, we train over 1,000 teachers every year. So we have about 400 teachers who are trained in our primary education sector, so for children aged 5 to 11, and about 600 teachers who are trained to teach in our secondary education sector, which is to 18-year-olds. So altogether, 1,000 teachers every year. They work in schools near Manchester after they've finished with us, but also across the UK. So you all know, because you know a lot about teaching, that teaching can really have a massive impact on people's lives. And I was really happy to hear Professor Mihalek talk about how all teaching needs to be inclusive, how we really need to be inclusive, and how we need some systemic change, some change to our systems to be able to do what we do in an inclusive way. So I was thinking about your 2020 National Education Policy, and I was thinking about how the introduction to it says that education is fundamental for achieving full human potential, and also not just at an individual level, but for developing an equitable and just society, which is something we've just been hearing about, and also promoting national development. And the introduction goes on to say, providing universal access to quality education is the key to India's continued ascent. And that's true, isn't it? Without education, we don't get anywhere. So education is really important in terms of economic growth, social justice and equality, scientific advancement, national integration, and cultural education. And in India, you've got a really high population, a high number of young people. And so if you can provide, and as a society in the world, we can provide high quality educational opportunities to your young people, those are the things that will determine the future of India as a country. So education is really, really important in that regard. So I was thinking also about what we mean by inclusion. We talked a little bit earlier on about inclusion, and inclusion usually means all children in the same classrooms, in the same schools. In the UK, that doesn't always happen. There are some children who are taught in what we call special schools. But really, what UNICEF talk about is how inclusive education is real learning opportunities for groups who have traditionally been excluded from education. That might be children and young people with disabilities, or children and young people who perhaps speak minority languages. But for inclusive education, we are talking about students from different backgrounds and with different abilities learning together in what we would call an inclusive environment. That links to the idea of social justice. Really important to think about inclusion and social justice together. Social justice being the view that everybody deserves equal rights. That's something that the San Diego Foundation talks about. Economic rights, political rights, and social rights and opportunities. And social justice depends on 4 essential goals: human rights, access, participation, and equity. And those structural issues are things that Professor Mahalik has already talked to. So we need to think very carefully about what the difference is between equality, equity, and justice. So if we've got the situation, we can provide everybody with some support, but that doesn't really help. We give everybody the same, that's equality. We don't want that. I need help and support that suits me, that is for me, and that takes into account what I need. And that might be very different from what you need. So you need to get the support you need. And that's the idea of affirmative action. And that produces equity. We can do that, but also what we can think about is justice. And we can think about the causes of the inequity. If we think of the cause of the inequity, we can try and remove systemic barriers. We can try and change society. And one of the things that I want to talk to you about today is about how do we do that? How do we get there? Because it's hard enough to talk about the ideas, but then how do we actually move those ideas into practice so that actually we are doing what we need to do? So what I want to talk to you about today, and what you'll see on my PowerPoint when it's sent round, is I want us to talk about the function of education. Why do we do what we do? And then talk about our responsibilities as teacher educators, as people who are turning out, who are educating, who are developing the teachers of the future. What does that mean? Also, I want to think about the work of Paulo Freire and how we can empower learners, the work of Nell Noddings in relation to a pedagogy of care. And then finally, I want to refer you to the work of Mike Apple, who's Professor of Education at Wisconsin-Madison University in the United States, and his tasks of a critical educator. So I'm going to start off, first of all, by talking about the work of Gert Biester. So he's an educationalist who's thought about the functions of education and said, what is education for? And he says there are 3 things that education is for. The first thing is obvious, really. It's qualifications. So getting knowledge, getting skills to go on and do something, our qualifications. And sure, those are really, really important. He also talks about socialization, how we enable the people we are educating to become part of society, to get them to understand the cultures and traditions of our society, the existing ways of doing and being, socialization. And then finally, his third function is subjectification, becoming more autonomous, becoming more independent in thinking and acting, becoming a person in society as well. So Gert Biester would say there are those three things: qualification, socialization, and subjectification that are the functions, the purpose of education in those three domains. I also mentioned that in teacher education, when we are working with teachers, it's very important that we understand that we are what I would call gatekeepers to the profession. We make sure that we let people into the profession who should be there, but we also need to be careful that people don't go into the profession who are not right for the profession. And it's really important that the people that we work with have a true understanding of inclusion and of social justice as well, and that we really are gatekeepers to the teaching profession. One of the ways that we do that is through empowering people, empowering our learners. And in this regard, I want to talk to you about the work of Paulo Freire. I'm sure that you've heard of him. I'm sure that you've read about him. If you haven't, then I would say one of the things that you should think very carefully about reading, a very important book, is called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And it's by Paulo Freire. You can find the reference to it on the PowerPoint that I'm sure the principal's PA will send round to you all. And it's very important to look, particularly, I think, at chapter 2 in that book, if you get a chance to do so. One of the things that Freire does is critique the banking model of education. What he means by that is that very often, I think, some teachers with young people sort of conceptually chop off their heads, fill them with information, and then put the top of their heads on again. Is that really what education is about? That we just fill our young people, that we just tell our young people things? Is that really what it's about? They aren't a bank. We don't just put information in there. We don't do that. It's important that we think very carefully about a dialogic process, a process where two people or more than one person are interacting together. It's not just about filling an empty vessel with information. That's not what good education is about. People who are disempowered, this is true in the UK, and I know it's true in India as well. People who don't have power, who are disempowered, usually already know why that is the case. They understand the sources of their oppression, and they understand what must be done to overcome that oppression. What those people who are disempowered don't have is an organised approach to translating that knowledge into action. Because they are disempowered, that can be very, very difficult. And that's something that Freire makes clear is important. And it's important for us as educators to understand that people who are disempowered cannot always by themselves get out of the oppressed situation in which they find themselves. One of the quotes that I'm very fond of from Paulo Freire's book, The Politics of Education, is this. He says, washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. So in other words, if we stand by and we say we're not going to take any notice, we're not going to look at that conflict, what that means is you are not siding with the people who need you. You are not on their side, you are on the side of the powerful. And when we think about inclusive education, we know that in terms of inclusion, very often people who are oppressed, who are in the minority, who have disabilities, who are perhaps transgender, all of those things, they need us to be on their side and not just to be neutral or to side or to be on the side of the powerful. Very important quote by Freire. Washing one's hands of the conflict between the powerful and the powerless means to side with the powerful, not to be neutral. Moving on from there, I want to introduce you to the work of a feminist educator, American feminist educator, whose name is Nell Noddings. Nell Noddings talks about a pedagogy of care. We all know that caring about our students is really the most important thing that we can do. We make sure that we know their names. We make sure that we understand their situation and where they come from. And Nell Noddings says, I do not mean to suggest that the establishment of caring relations will accomplish everything that must be done in education. But these relations, she means the caring relations, provide the foundation for successful pedagogical activity. In other words, if we care, a lot of other things come right. And I think you know that. I think you see that in your own practice, that when you care, it makes a huge difference to what else happens and to what happens to the people, the learners who you are working with. So very important to have a pedagogy of caring. And what works for people who are perhaps disabled or have in some other way don't always typically fit into a mainstream school. What works for disabled people, people who speak a second language, transgender people, people who perhaps are gay, all of those people, what works for them will also work for everybody else. And we need to remember that when we're thinking about inclusive education. Very important to think about a pedagogy of caring, according to Nell Noddings. So how do we do that? Well, Nell Noddings said, first of all, we need to listen to our students. We don't just talk at them and talk to them. We need to listen to our students, we gain their trust, and we develop a relationship of caring and trusting. If we do that, we all know that it's more likely that students will accept what we try to teach. That way, the students don't see our efforts as us interfering with them, but instead, they see it as cooperative work that comes from the excellent relationship that we've built up with the students. So in other words, we're not doing things to students, we're doing things with our students. That collaboration is really, really important. Secondly, Nell Noddings said, as we engage our students in dialogue, we learn about their needs, their working habits, their interests, their lives, and their talents. And we get important ideas from them about how we should teach them, how we should build our lessons, and how we should plan for their individual progress. Finally, Nell Noddings said, as we acquire knowledge about our students and about our needs, we realise how much more than the standard curriculum is needed. And because we realise that, we are inspired to increase our own skills, our own competence, to come to conferences, to talk to each other, those sorts of things. Really, really important. So all of those are things to do with Nell Noddings and caring. I want to finish by spending quite a bit of time talking about the work of Professor Michael Apple, who I mentioned before. I've been very lucky in my career in education to have been able to work with Mike Apple. He's an inspirational person. He's an inspirational speaker. And I would refer you to any of his books, but also to things like on YouTube, you will see various videos that Mike Apple's got. One of the things that he's got is a video that you can find on YouTube where he is talking to Paulo Freire. He and Paulo Freire were big friends, and both of them have stood up for the rights of the oppressed, for people who aren't included over their careers, and been put in prison because they've stood up for those rights. So they're very powerful people. Paulo Freire is dead now, of course, but Mike Apple is very much alive and very much kicking. And I'm very proud to have worked with Mike when I was at the University of Manchester. So Mike says there are 9 tasks for critical educators such as us. What are those tasks? Well, I'm going to go through a few of them, but first of all, I'll list them. Mike says, first of all, bear witness to negativity. I'll explain that in a minute. Point to contradictions and spaces of possible action. Act as critical secretaries to those engaged in activism. Contribute to understandings of important knowledge. Keep progressive traditions alive. Speak in different registers for different audiences. Act with progressive movements. Be a mentor and a role model. And for people like us who have privilege, use our privilege to open spaces for people who don't have privilege. So let's have a think about those tasks one at a time. First of all, the first task that Mike Apple said was important for a critical educator was to bear witness to negativity. What he meant by that was that we should illuminate, we should show, and we should make evident the ways in which educational policy and educational practice are connected to exploitation and to domination and to the struggles against such relations. In other words, when we see things that are not to do with social justice, are not fair, are not equitable, are not to do with equality, are not inclusive, we should say. We need to speak out. And that's hard. I had a discussion with Mike a few years ago where I said, well, that's really difficult. And he said, yeah, it is really difficult. You're right. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. So just because I'm sitting here saying, oh, that's going to be very hard to challenge some people there. Yes, it's very hard to do. That's his first task then. Bear witness to negativity. Mike's, one of his other tasks is to point to contradictions and spaces of possible action. In other words, try and change the world. Something else that's difficult. And we can't change the whole world at once. Mike freely admits that it's very difficult for one person to do these things or for somebody to change the whole world. But what he does say is that we need to think about how we can empower people. Remember, I talked about the work of Freire. How can we give people power? Well, we can give them power by working with them instead of just doing things to them, and think about how they can be agents. In other words, how they can do things that they need to do for themselves, how they can develop agency and independence. And what we need to do is be aware of the spaces and the possibilities and make sure that they are done both for the individual, the level of individual experience, as well as at the institutional level where we're working in schools or colleges or academies. If we don't do that, if we don't point out that we need change and that we need to make sure we say we need change and I'm standing with you and I will help you, research and our thinking can just lead you to be despairing or cynical. Very easy, I think, for you to just think, what's the point? I don't know if you know the story of the starfish. There's a story that my daughter is very fond of, and it's a story of a woman who's walking along a beach. and she finds there are lots of starfish who've been washed up onto the beach and are perhaps going to die. And so she picks up a starfish and she throws it back into the sea, saying, there, starfish, you'll be all right now. And somebody who's watching her says, it's so big, you can't make any difference to all those starfish. And the woman says, no, but I made a difference to that one. Now, as educators, we can't change the whole world at once. But what we do is we work with individuals, and we can make a difference to individuals and to make a difference in that way. So I think it's really important that we remember starfishes and make sure that we save who we can, we help who we can, and we bring them into a fully inclusive, empowering environment. Excuse me. So, what else did Michael Apple say in his Tasks for a Critical Educator? He says we need to act as what he calls critical secretaries. What he means by that is that when we are thinking and researching into education, we have to write about those groups of people and social movements who are engaged in challenging things that aren't inclusive, who are engaged in challenging existing relations of unequal power. If we do that, that is very, very powerful when it's accompanied by truly collaborative and truly cooperative work, both with individuals and with groups, who are building successful, counter-hegemonic programs, institutions, and alternatives. We need to work with those people, and we need to make sure that we document as critical secretaries what those groups of people and social movements are actually doing. Moving on, what else did Mike Apple say? He said, think about what we mean by knowledge. Think about what we mean by socially just education. And that's something that Professor Mahalik was talking to us about half an hour ago. We need to think about what do we mean by social justice. We need to make sure that we keep the traditions of radical and progressive work alive. And sometimes when we are fighting for justice, it's very difficult for us to do that. As I said, Paulo Freire and Mike Apple were both arrested because of what they said. Mike Apple was asked not to speak in a particular place because of what he was saying about education. So there are all kinds of attacks on people that make it very difficult for you, for I, and other people to keep those approaches alive. But those approaches are absolutely key in countering some of the dominant, hegemonic, powerful narratives that are going on in education and in general in the world at the moment. Obviously, as I was coming to talk to you today, I did a bit of research about Indian education, and I see that you have the same kind of problems in India as we have in the UK. So I'm aware that these problems of power, of lack of equity, of lack of social justice are not just problems that exist in some places. They exist across the world. Very, very important. As part of those dreams, as part of that dreaming big, Mike Apple talks about how we should keep theories, history, and political traditions alive. So we need to think about what has happened in the past. In the UK, about 100 years ago, there was a massive movement to do with feminism and women. And it's really important that we remember that women fought, for example, to get the vote, those sorts of things, and that we keep those progressive traditions alive, because they are the ones that help us to challenge the current relations of power. However, We can't just say, well, that's brilliant, let's carry on doing that. We, of course, need to make sure that we are being critical. And by that, I mean critical in the sense that we think about them in a way that means we are looking at the pros and cons, the good things and the bad things. We're not just saying, oh, that's brilliant. We are being critical of them. And we also need to think about extending those approaches as well. And part of that, and probably very importantly, is to keep alive the dreams and the visions that are part of the radical traditions which are so much part of our history. The fight against inequality, the fight for social justice, the fight to empower learners. That's what we're about. So dream big. Think about what counts as knowledge and think about socially just education. What does that mean? In order to do that, we have to be able to speak to very different audiences. You know this. I can't talk to a class full of children in the way that I am talking to you now. I talk to professors using a different kind of language, a different kind of vocabulary from the language and vocabulary that I would talk to my children with. Of course I do. So we need to talk in what I will call different registers. We need to say important things in ways that don't mean that the audience or the reader has to do all the work. You know this, really good speakers actually are very, very clear. They make it very obvious what they want to say. It's not hard to understand them. That's very, very important, I think. So we need to speak in different registers and we need to learn that. And that might mean writing skills. It might mean skills on the internet. It might mean skills, for example, on social media. We need to find out what the best way is for us to communicate with the people that we need to communicate with. Think about the important things we've got to say and say them. But say them in a way that people can understand what is being said and how it's being said as well. You may have read the work of Bakhtin. I don't know, but one of the things that Bakhtin talks about is he has a phrase which is, don't take a seat on the balcony. And I like to think about this. If you can imagine you are in a beautiful city and maybe you're on holiday, maybe you're lucky enough to be somewhere beautiful. And if you can imagine you are sitting on a balcony and you are looking out over the city and all kinds of things are going on in the city. I very often imagine in that situation that I'm in Venice, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful city. And I could be sitting on a balcony looking out over the canals, looking out over things. But we shouldn't really live on the balcony. Don't take a seat on the balcony. We shouldn't be looking above, sitting above and looking out. What we should be doing is working closely with the people. So we need to act together with, in concert with, the progressive social movements that our work supports. And we need to learn from those social movements as well. Let's not sit on the balcony. Let's get our hands dirty. Let's roll our sleeves up. Let's do something to make our society more just and our education more inclusive. You will have heard of the work of Pierre Bourdieu. In 2003, he reminded us that we cannot stand aside, neutral and indifferent from the struggles in which the future of the world is at stake. And that's so true, isn't it? We mustn't stand aside from them. We must be there and we must do things. Don't take a seat on the balcony. It might be comfortable. Maybe we don't need to be comfortable. I think that's really, really important. Part of that, and this is really important for us in education, is one of Mike Apple's other tasks. Be a mentor and be a role model. Be deeply committed. I really hope that you can see from me today and from the way that I'm talking to you that I am deeply, deeply committed to education. I think it is really, really important. It's the way in which we change the world. And inclusive education is the way forwards. We need to be a mentor for people and we need to be a role model. We need in our jobs to demonstrate what it means to be an excellent researcher, but also to be a committed member of a society that, to be honest, is scarred, is hurt, is damaged by the persistent inequalities that happen. We know we have a society which is not equal. We know that that does us no good as a nation, as a world, as an institution. And then we really, really need to make sure that we challenge that and that we are truly, truly committed. So we need to say that we can blend the roles together of being an excellent researcher and also a committed member of that damaged society, a committed member who wants to change things, who believes in inclusion. There can be a tension in doing that. But Mike Apple says, and I would agree, we need to commit to exceptional and socially committed research and also to participating in movements whose aim is disrupting dominance. Disrupt those power relations. But also, if we are truly to change the world and change society, we need to integrate this into our teaching. You know that when you're a teacher, you influence a lot of people. I remember teachers from when I was a child and how much influence they had on me. You will have influence on other people too. They will remember you. You have the ideal opportunity to tell people what is really, really important. Absolutely key that you do that. Really, really important. Which brings me on to one of Apple's other things that I mentioned earlier on. Use your privilege. You are privileged. You are educated. You are wonderfully privileged to be able to be here this evening as I am. Absolutely wonderful thing to be able to do, to talk to each other across continents like this. But we need to make sure that we do open the spaces at educational institutions, at universities and elsewhere for others who aren't there, who aren't as privileged. Not everybody has a voice in this space. Not everybody has a voice, not just in this space, in other spaces where you have access. You have a voice. I have a voice. I need to make sure that I use that privilege, that I use that, and I use that for good. That's really, really, really important. Mike Apple says these tasks are really difficult. There are 9 tasks. We can't all do them at the same time. That's not possible. But what we can do is think about our own privilege. Think about our own structural location. Where are we in society as an individual? Where am I? What are my commitments? What am I committed to? I know that I am committed to education, to social justice, to empowerment. What do I do? Well, one of the things that I can do is come and talk to you and share my ideas, but more importantly, the ideas of important people like Nell Noddings, like Michael Apple, like Paulo Freire. I can share those with you. I need to make sure that I do something, not just that I sit comfortably on my balcony. I need to make sure I get off my balcony and that I do that difficult work. So I want to finish, and I think there may be time for questions, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that over this, but if we can, that's great. But I want to finish with one more quote, and that quote is the quote from Nelson Mandela. I use this quote quite often if I write a book chapter or anything like that, and it's because I believe in it totally, and I believe in it in relation to inclusion. And this quote is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." Mandela was right. With truly equitable and inclusive education that we are all aiming for, we can change the world. And it is our job to get off the balcony, to challenge the relations of power which can be so destructive and damaging, and to make sure that we produce a truly inclusive education system, but also a truly inclusive society that will help us to change the world. I'd love to continue the discussion with you. And so when you get the slides sent round, on the very last slide, I've put my email address. Please do get in touch with me. I don't think I can put it in the chat here. I don't seem to be able to put any comments in the chat, although it's lovely to hear yours, but I don't seem to be able to do that. So I'd be really, really grateful if when you get my slides, please do make sure that you get in touch with me and tell me what you think and tell me how I can help you or anything like that. Really, really happy to continue that discussion. So that's me for now. I don't know if anybody has got any questions, and if we can take questions. I don't know if that's possible to do it. Perhaps Principal Secretary could help. Can we do that?
We do have some questions, but right now I don't think in the chat box we find any of that. So I think whatever you have said, that we will be delivering the questions, if we have any, in the email ID that you have provided to us, so that you can cater to them later on, and we can find the answers and address to them properly.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Principal,
yes.
The principal has my PowerPoint slides. Would it be possible for you to send them to everybody, please?
Yes, ma'am. We'll just simply try to forward that to whatever email IDs and wherever we have got it.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
So
I will say good evening for you.
I will say good evening to you, and thank you very much for having me today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ma'am, we request you to kindly stay with us, as we have some young budding participants who were very willing to present their papers and are waiting for a long time with a lot of motivation and hope. And thank you for your brilliant speech. Your simple words have elevated us to the reign of wisdom and profound knowledge. Indeed, in order to introduce this new system of education, we must empower our new learners through an organized approach, and that must be implemented in the pedagogical framework of whatever curriculum we are following. Thank you, ma'am. And now we will be moving on to the presentation session with Garema Agrawal from Regional Institute of Education. Ma'am, are you here? I would request you to kindly take over from here.
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am. Could you hear me?
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Please.
Good evening, everyone. Esteemed Shri Jayant Kumar Chakrabarti, Sir, Chairman, Rajendra Academy for Teacher Education, Principal, Professor B. Sri Swain, our very respected Professor Ramakant Mohammed from Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar, Professor Janet, it was lovely hearing to you, Head of Education, Manchester University, and my other dignitaries and friends who are here with us today evening. My name is Garema Agrawal. I'm a student of PhD in RI Bhubaneswar, and also I am teaching in DM School Bhubaneswar as TGT English. So today my topic of presentation is using e-content for teaching or developing listening skills among students. So as we have discussed right now that how much the COVID times has affected the health sector and also the education sector. Students have not seen the school buildings in recent times. They have been locked inside the room, and the only source of knowledge for them is their mobile phones or television or laptop or desktop, whatever they have at their home. We are relying very much on technology to pass on the information, to pass on the knowledge to our beloved students. So, as we have always learned that language is communication, it's a two-way communication. We cannot teach language sitting at home. When there is no communication, there is no learning, no language development will take place. So seeing this, it has always, put a spark on my teaching and learning process that how we can inculcate the use of technology, okay, to enrich the language learning among students. How we can bring in e-content, which is very much recognized as a potential resource to teach different subjects and especially language, because language needs communication. So I'm just going to present my PPT. I'm trying to do it. Just give me a second, guys. Sir, could you please help me with this?
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir, you're
Hello.
audible. Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yes. Okay. So from your cell phone or from your desktop, you are connected.
So I'm connected to both the devices.
Okay. You need to switch on your PowerPoint presentation in your laptop, and
So,
you need to minimize the window and
okay,
close the camera of laptop.
okay, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah.
do that. So, is it visible now?
Wait. It is not yet visible. It is not yet visible. You can see here. I switched on both of your screens, but it is not visible here.
Okay, just a minute, so I'm just trying once again.
Okay, there is an option of sharing the screen. Can you see that?
Right now,
There is a menu bar. You switched on the camera from both the devices. Yeah.
so can I use my mobile and just turn off the just turn on the back camera and show my PPT?
You just have to share the screen from your laptop. You just need to click on the share screen option, which
So
is available there.
actually, I'm not getting that share screen option only.
Uh, can you see the mute option, stop camera
Yeah,
option, camera
that
and
is
yeah, you
yes.
just have to click on share option. Click on that and
So actually, I'm just getting four options: mic, camera, chat, and leave. I'm not getting the share option at all.
okay. So I'm
But
afraid that you won't be able to share it.
I can just flip in the camera. I can show my PPT from here. I will just use
Yes,
my phone
yes.
camera to
Yes,
flip
you
it.
can do that. You can do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Okay, I'm doing that. So I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry for the disturbance. Just a minute. Okay. I think it should be visible now. Is it fine, sir? Should we go ahead with this kind of setup?
Keep the phone in vertical position.
Okay.
Yeah. This is, yeah. Yes.
Extremely sorry guys for the disturbance. So actually, I'm very new to this, and I don't know, maybe my phone is not supporting that share option.
You just need to switch on the camera from the other device, from where we can see you.
Okay. So that is not happening. I don't know why. I don't think that's possible because I'm only using one connection. The other one
Okay.
is
Then I'm only keeping this screen in which
yes,
you are
please.
showing this PowerPoint.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yes, sir.
Sure.
So should I continue, sir?
Yes. You can continue.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. You can continue. You can continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yes, as I told you that my topic is using of e-content in developing listening skills. So like the classroom environment which we used to have previously, is not going to serve the learners of the present day because the technology has evolved so much that the traditional chalk and talk method, which the teachers used earlier, and that has reduced the learning of language to just memorization and mechanical learning. But that is not exactly what language is. We need to communicate. We need to put our ideas front. Okay, so we have to come out of the traditional chalk and talk method, and we have to inculcate some novel techniques that is going to bring in the interest among students to learn language, to how to communicate well. And the present day learners, they are full of information they're getting from different sources like technology, information technology, internet. Lot of information and knowledge are they are just ready to serve them with. So students are drowned in the cascade of information. The teachers are no longer considered as the only knower of the information. The omnipresence of technology has made it possible for everyone to access new information in just a click. Because children nowadays, they are just binge watching on television, on videos, they are playing games, they are creating animation. They are so much, in the front line, that we are not only going to give them bookish knowledge, only traditional knowledge. That is not going to serve the purpose. It's the 21st century. Something new has to come in. So why not bring children's interest areas into the classroom? Why don't we use video clips, different forms of e-content? Okay, like games or animation. It will not only change how our students look into education and language education in particular, but also it will serve as an amazing tool for teaching. Because children will be interested, they will be looking at videos, they will be watching interesting animated videos, which is going to keep them engaged throughout the classroom. Language learning never takes place just one way, it is always two-way. E-contents have proven to be beneficial in teaching a variety of subjects and concepts. Integrating e-content to teach listening skill will enhance engagement among students and bring out the true interactivity within the classroom. So like I told you earlier, that language, we mean that communicating, okay, allowing our expressions to put in front of others, how we feel, what we think, our feelings, ideas. And that is only how we will be able to communicate with others. The whole world understand different languages, and if there is one language which many people understand, I should say maximum people understand, is English. We can easily access the world's knowledge if we have a good command over English language. So these are some definitions. I'm not going into it because I know there's some technical problem you won't be able to see. Now, when we talk about language, there are 4 basic skills of language: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These are the 4 skills popularly known as LSRW skills. Now, why only listening? So for this study, I have taken listening in particular because I feel that in educational setup, not in India, I think all over the world, I think listening is that particular skill in language which is being ignored the most when it comes to classroom teaching. We want our children to speak well, read well, write well. But how much time do we really employ to make sure that they're listening to us, listening to good English speakers? I think that is the one which is most neglected skill, and also the most important skill out of all 4. Okay. Listening is particularly one important skill that paves the way for the other 3 skills. It's a very common saying that all the 4 skills are interrelated, intertwined. And I agree, it's very true. Unless and until you're a good listener, you won't be a good speaker. So all the 4 are, they are interconnected. And when a child is born, when he comes to the world, he spends most of his time only listening to a language. We all know that, right? That is the reason, I think that is the most important reason why a child is most fluent in his or her mother tongue. You will hardly find anyone who will say, no, I am not confident in my mother tongue. No, people are not confident in their second language, foreign language. Why? Because they are not giving enough time for listening. The time when a child is born and is only listening to a language without bothering to speak or read or write is known as the silent period, because the child is only exposed to listening. His family, his relatives, or whoever is just talking to them, and they are just absorbing. They are only listening. And that is why a child is most fluent in their mother tongue. Now, why e-content? Why do you think that e-content should come into the picture and we should use it to teach listening skill? Because it has been recognized as a very effective tool to engage learners in the classroom. Because when we are using e-content, we are catering to many senses of students. They are listening, they are using their sound system, they are looking to the pictures, they are using their vision, they are enjoying, they're feeling. So many senses are, catered when we introduce e-content in the classroom. And that is why children are most interested when we bring something which they can relate to. Every children, they love watching TVs, video contents, animations. And if something like that comes into the classroom, nothing like that. I mean, I have used this technique and I have seen the level of excitement among students to learn something new. Every day they're excited, something new it is going to come. It's a very, very lively source of material, teaching material, because they are engaged thoroughly. It's not that only a teacher is standing. So just imagine only a person will be standing in front of you and speaking 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Everybody, I mean, why students? We also can get easily bored, because, how long can we listen to? Our patience, it just gives up. But e-content, when we introduce it, students feel motivated. They feel enthusiastic. They are looking forward to learn something new every day, because they know that it is not only a single person who is going to talk, but rather the classroom becomes rich, Okay. So e-content, what is e-content? It is not a new topic. All over the world, people are using this for enriching their classrooms. They're often known as digital content, which is rich in information and transmitted via network, okay, which can be internet. The digital text and graphics created to appear on websites are referred to as e-content.
Well, I am very sorry to interrupt you, ma'am, but due to the constraint of time, I have to request you to kindly wrap it up. And I would request Aribam Pratima Devi, Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar, to kindly be ready as you will be taking over, right after Garima, ma'am.
Okay, so
Okay,
thank you.
ma'am.
I'll just give me just 1 minute. I'm going to
Sure.
wrap it only. So, as we have already know, I told you that national policy of ICT in school education and also in NCF has identified and told about the importance of ICT in the field of education. And many e-contents are being developed all over India, and especially Regional Institute of Education, and they have very rich studio where e-contents are continuously being developed for all the classes starting from primary to secondary, so that in the times of pandemic people can easily access it, like whenever they feel comfortable or they have time they can go through it, and all the textbooks are being digitalized, very beautiful e-contents are being made. So I have also recorded 3 4 e-contents to show you, but since there is scarcity of time, so I'm not going to show you. But I would request everyone to access this e-content which is telecasted in e-Vidya channel, and also it is easily accessible on Diksha portal. Many teachers are using this e-content to enrich their classroom, and also my study is in my PhD study is to find out the effectiveness of e-content in not only language listening skill, but listening, speaking, reading, writing, all the skills, how far or how well we can enrich, we can bring it into our classrooms and see the wonders or magic that e-contents can bring into the classroom, which is otherwise so traditional and so classical that like students are very much not interested in the classrooms. So I hope that we all can identify the potential of e-content and bring it into our classrooms. So with this I would like to conclude my speech, and I'm so sorry for this very rough presentation because of the some
No, ma'am,
technical.
it is fine. It is fine.
Okay. Thank you everyone
In fact,
for
due
this.
to the constraint of time, we have to limit our possibilities on this online platform. But we are grateful for your presentation. It was brilliant. Thank you, ma'am. And now I would move on to Mr. Aribam Pratima Devi.
Am I
Can you
audible, ma'am?
hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Yes.
Okay.
You may
Thank
please
you very
begin with
much.
your
Thank you
presentation,
very
but
much.
please let me announce that due to the
Okay, sure.
constraint of time, we have allotted just 5 minutes to
Okay, ma'am, I
present
understand.
your paper. And I would
Okay.
also request Shobhik Raj, Assistant Professor of JC Bose Institute of Education and Research, to be ready as you will be presenting right after her. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am, you may begin now.
A very good evening to one and all present here. At the very outset, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizer for giving me this opportunity. And I will try to present as fast as I could. So I'm just turning my cam so that you can see my presentation. Yes. So this is the PPT I have prepared, and I am a research scholar at the Department of Education, Regional Institute of Education, Bhubaneswar. And the title for my today's presentation is Multiple Intelligence Theory-Based Pedagogy: A Step Towards Inclusion. So, as we all know that India is a very diverse country, and the Indian classroom represents different cultures, traditions, people, ethnicity, race, and diverse backgrounds. As spoken by the previous speakers, that education is a right for every child in India since the implementation of the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, that is the RTE 2009. So the main focus of education today is to reach to each and every individual and draw the best out of them by providing opportunities to shine. And in India, we have been taking several steps, and there are several policies which helps us to move towards inclusion. For instance, Kothari Commission that was introduced in the year 1964 to 1966 recommended integrating children with disabilities in education with other children. Then integrated education for disabled children 1972, which is now replaced by inclusive education for disabled at secondary stage 2009. It also provides general education to the disabled. Then the National Education Policy in 1986 and our very recent NEP 2020, it also aims for an education that is inclusive and prevents segregation and isolation of ethnic and linguistic minorities, people with disabilities, and people who have difficulty in learning due to language challenges and are at risk of being excluded from the school. Then also we have Rights of People with Disabilities Act, and all these are reinforcing inclusive education in the country. And the term inclusive education gained momentum after the World Conference on Special Needs Education, which is stated in the Salamanca Statement, Spain in 1994. So I will not go much into detail about what is inclusive education and how can we make inclusion into action. We can do that by developing a conducive educational environment. Then we have to make changes in the physical infrastructure, the curriculum, and the resources. Then the teachers have to be aware of inclusive education, the needs, importance, the practices, and how they can transact their lessons accordingly. And also they have to appreciate the diversity in the classroom. So what do we mean by inclusive pedagogy? Inclusive pedagogy is a unique approach to classroom teaching that provides an acceptable pedagogical strategy to decrease educational disparity by boosting learning opportunities for all students. So it includes giving scope for active participation to discover and stimulate the potentials within for all types of learners. So my the focus of my paper is the inclusive education, and I think we can achieve this. Like what inclusive education is and how it ought to be can be achieved by the integration of this theory, that is multiple intelligence theory. So this theory was proposed by Howard Gardner, and in 1983, he published his book that is Frames of Mind, The Theory of Multiple Intelligence. After this, it gained momentum, and this theory states that all people have different kinds of intelligence, and it treats that every child is unique, and we have different learning styles, and we learn in different ways. So this theory was developed after years of research on human cognition and contrasting views of intelligence as a single entity. It describes the pluralistic nature of intelligence that each individual possesses, and it also challenges the traditional concept of that all the learners learn in the same way. And it also states that every individual is unique and has different learning styles. So, according to this theory, there are this many types of multiple intelligence. That is, and we are focusing only on the 8 types of intelligence. And here we are going to discuss about the multiple intelligence theory based pedagogy for inclusive classroom. Like how can we implement this theory for creating an inclusive pedagogy for inclusive classroom. So Gardner's MI theory can be used to foster a more inclusive environment by appreciating that everyone has varied strengths in different areas. It has been adopted in different educational settings and is found to be beneficial for inclusive education. And the theory was found effective in teaching learning of children with special needs. Like, for example, Mahmoud and Ali in 2019 conducted one study and they proved that the theory is very much effective on the academic achievement of children with dyscalculia. Then, similarly, there were many other researches which were conducted, and they proved that the utility of multiple intelligence theory for inclusive education with special reference to the diverse intelligence profile displayed by children with intellectual disabilities and developmental problems. Then, it also presented the positive impacts of multiple intelligence practices on creating an inclusive classroom and the impact of multiple intelligence training program on achievement and retention of reading comprehension skills of reading disabled primary 6 students were also found. So these are some of the researches which were conducted in the field of children with special needs. So, MI theory can reduce the gap between the theory of what an inclusive pedagogy ought to be and what it is to be in action. And it offers the notion that every child is unique and they learn in different way. And when we design strategies according to the multiple intelligence theory, then it can provide options of learning experiences to the learners, which will focus on the strength of the learner and will help them to nurture and improve. So, the application of the theory in education can make learning joyful enjoyable, and effective, which is the main target. Then teachers need to be aware of this theory and have a proper understanding and knowledge. When teachers appreciate the diversity in the classroom, then we can bring the idea of inclusion into action. So here are some of the strategies, like how can we implement the multiple intelligence theory in designing an inclusive pedagogy. So what we can do is, according to the different types of intelligence, we can develop strategies. Like for example, these are some of the strategies which are given by Thomas Armstrong in his book. So for the verbal linguistic intelligence, that is the word smart people, we can use activities like discussions, then word games, storytelling, choral reading, journal writing. For the number smart or the logical mathematical intelligence, we can use problem solving method, science experiments, mental calculations, number games, Socratic teaching, etc. For the picture smart or the visual spatial intelligence, we can use visual presentations, art activities, imaginations, games, mind mapping, sorry, metaphor, and visualization. And for the body smart people, or the bodily kinesthetic intelligence, we can use hands-on learning, drama, dance, sports, tactile activities, relaxation activities. For the musical and rhythmic intelligence, we can use music in teaching, we can use rapping, singing, using songs to teach. For the interpersonal or the people smart, we can use cooperative learning, peer or cross-age tutoring, community involvement, social gatherings, and simulations. For the intrapersonal or the self-smart people, we can use individualized instructions like individual
Excuse me,
projects,
ma'am.
independent study,
Sorry to interrupt
worksheets,
you. I
self-determination, and skill
have to
building.
request you to kindly wrap it up as I request
Yes, ma'am,
Mr.
I'm
Shobik
over.
Raj to be present with your paper,
Yes, ma'am, I'm just,
and I request
yeah,
you
I'm just,
to kindly wrap it up
yes, yes.
so that we can
And the last
continue.
one
We are
is the
very sorry
Metropolitan
as we are
intelligence.
already having
It's
very
okay, ma'am.
limited
I
time with
understand.
us.
Yes, yes, I understand.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. It was brilliant, but we are very sorry as we have a limited time. We couldn't allow you enough space. I would now like to welcome Mr. Shobik Raj to kindly take over from here and begin on with your presentation. Sir, please. Sir, I think you have to unmute yourself, please. Yes, sir, you may. Please unmute yourself and then you may begin. We cannot hear you, sir. Just, I think sir is not here. There is some technical glitches. We are trying to resolve that. Kindly bear
Am
with
I
us.
audible? Ma'am,
Yes,
am I audible?
yes, sir, you are
Okay,
audible.
thank
You
you, ma'am.
can begin.
Thank you, ma'am. Sincerely thanks to all the distinguished guests who came into the international conference, and also thanks my respected teachers and Swine sir, and also my favorite Jayanta sir. I will say respect all of teachers to start that one say words. It's Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Deva Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Nama. Now today's topic is role of teacher in inclusive education system, presented by Shobik Raj, Assistant Professor of JC Bose Institute of Education and Research. According to APJ Abdul Kalam, when learning is purposeful, creativity blossoms. When creativity blossoms, thinking innovates. When thinking innovates, the knowledge is fully lived, and when knowledge is fully lived, its economy flourishes. Now, I discuss what is the meaning of inclusive education. Inclusive education is defined as a learning environment that promotes the full personal, academic, and professional development of all learners, irrespective of races, class, color, gender, disability, sexual preference, and learning style and language also. Now I will discuss the various commissions who established the inclusion education system. The District Education Program 1985, and next the National Policy on Education 1986, then the Project Integrated Education for the Disabled launched the 1987, and the Persons with Disabilities Act is 1995. Then I will discuss the principles of inclusive education. No discrimination with students, equal educational opportunity to all, school adapts to the needs of students, equal educational benefits for all students, the student views are listed and taken seriously. The individual differences between students are a source of richness and diversity and not a problem also. Now I will discuss the practice of developing inclusive schools involved. The first topic is the training and the sustaining the participation of all students, all teachers, parents and community members in the work of the school.
I think there is some technical glitches, and that is why we have lost Shobik sir. And we would request Ms. Shreya Chatterjee. Ma'am, are you there? Ms. Shreya Chatterjee, she is trying continuously, and we are also trying. Mr.
Am I
Shobik is
audible,
here.
ma'am?
Yes, sir. Are you
Yes,
here?
ma'am.
Okay, you may please
Yes,
continue.
yes. Now
I think Mr. Shobik is having some technical glitches, and that is why he is not being able to connect with us. I think he is trying. We are also trying to connect with Miss Shreya. Ma'am, are you here? Kindly bear with us. I think it is because of this online platform and technical glitches. Unfortunately, I think they are not being able to connect with us. So with this, we come to the end of today's program, which it is to be adjourned today. And thank you so much, Professor Ramakanta Mahalik sir, Professor Janet ma'am, and all the other participants who have presented here, who has been trying so many times to connect with us. We'll try to be connected with you. We have another session tomorrow, right at the same time at 5 p.m. Please stay connected. We will be having some more eminent speakers who shall enlighten us with their knowledge and experience. Till then, thank you. Namaskar.